The grand auction hall was a spectacle of glittering lights, alien music, and a buzz of excitement. Mark sat in the back of the crowd, trying to blend in with the sophisticated atmosphere of the space station. As a human, he felt a little out of place among the high-ranking aliens and the strange, otherworldly creatures that filled the room. But there he was, quietly observing as the elite from different corners of the galaxy exchanged glances, murmured to each other, and watched the next prize being brought out. He wasn't sure why he was here or what drew him to the auction, but curiosity had gotten the better of him. The posters and advertisements had been everywhere, rare beasts, captives, and exotics from across the stars. Mark had assumed it was some kind of strange marketplace, one that catered to the whims of the rich and powerful. He wasn't interested in buying anything, but something about the thought of watching, about seeing these exotic beings displayed like commodities, bothered him. It was wrong, but he couldn't look away. The auctioneer, a towering creature with 6 arms and a face that looked like a cross between a lizard and a bird, stepped up onto the stage. His voice boomed across the room, drawing Mark's attention back. "Next up," the auctioneer announced, "a very rare and intriguing specimen, a woman from the distant planet of Zarin, taken during the recent war. She is unlike any we have seen before, and her uniqueness will surely make her a valuable addition to any collection." The curtains parted, and Mark's breath caught in his throat. The woman that stepped onto the stage was not what he expected. Her appearance was anything but conventional. She had rough, dark green skin, her face marred by battle scars, and her eyes glowed a fiery red. Her body was strong, her muscles defined and covered in faint tattoos that told a story of survival. But despite her raw power, there was something in the way she held herself, something that made her look defeated. She was tall, but her posture was heavy, burdened, and she had chains around her wrists that dragged on the floor. The crowd watched in silence for a moment, unsure how to react. This wasn't a beautiful creature like the others. This was someone who had clearly been through hell. Mark felt his heart go out to her. She didn't belong on display like this, her fate determined by the highest bidder. The auctioneer's voice cut through the silence. "As you can see, she is not like the others. Not for those who desire beauty, but for those who want power, strength, and a challenge." Mark's brow furrowed. This wasn't right. No one in the room seemed to understand how wrong it felt. The woman, who was clearly a warrior, deserved more than this. She deserved freedom, dignity, and respect. But instead, she was about to be sold to the highest bidder like some prized trophy. The bidding began at an absurdly high price, 200,000 credits. Mark glanced around the room as the numbers climbed, the interested buyers eyeing her as if she were a rare piece of art. He saw no compassion, no understanding in their gazes, only a desire to possess. As the price reached nearly 500,000 credits, Mark couldn't take it any longer. Without thinking, he stood up and raised his hand. The entire room fell silent. All eyes were on him. The auctioneer blinked, surprised by the human's sudden bid. "Ah, a human bidder," the auctioneer said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Interesting. A bid of 500,000 credits from the human. Do we have another offer?" Mark's heart raced. He wasn't even sure what he was doing. But when he saw the look in her eyes, the silent defiance, the flicker of hope, he knew it was the right thing. He couldn't let her be sold like this. The silence stretched. No one else raised their hand. Everyone else in the room was either too intimidated or simply too uninterested to bid on someone so unconventional. "Going once, going twice," the auctioneer called. Mark's palms were sweating. Was he really going to win this? Sold to the human in the back. The gavel slammed down, and the room buzzed with whispers. Mark barely heard them. His attention was focused entirely on the woman being led toward him. She walked slowly, her chains clinking with each step, but her eyes never left Mark's. There was something about the way she looked at him, piercing, calculating, but also something else. A flicker of curiosity, surprise, maybe even disbelief. When she finally reached him, the guards handed her over to him with little ceremony. She stood there, her eyes scanning him, trying to figure out what kind of person he was. Mark was caught off guard by how deeply she stared at him, as if she was looking for something in him, something he wasn't sure he could give. "Why did you bid on me?" she asked in a voice that was low, rough, but surprisingly steady. Mark hesitated, unsure of how to explain. "I didn't want them to sell you. You're not some object. You deserve better than this." She didn't say anything for a long moment, just looking at him as if considering his words. Finally, she spoke again, her voice softer this time but still guarded. "You don't know what you've gotten yourself into, human." "I guess we'll find out together," Mark said with a small smile, despite the tension in the air. Her lips curled into a slight smile. "I'm Kira," she said, "and don't think I owe you anything just because you bought me." Mark chuckled, his nerves easing slightly. "I didn't buy you, I'm just helping you if you want it." She met his gaze, and for the first time since he'd seen her on stage, she looked a little less defeated. "I'll take whatever help I can get." Kira's first night in Mark's quarters was an awkward silence that stretched for hours. They didn't know each other, and the strange circumstances of their meeting hung heavily between them. Mark sat at the small table, cleaning the equipment he'd used to buy her freedom, while Kira sat at the edge of the room, her eyes distant, her posture tense. Mark could feel the weight of the silence. It wasn't just because of the obvious, the strange and uncomfortable situation. It was something else. The way she was looking at him, as if trying to figure him out, made him feel uneasy. He had to remind himself she wasn't just a rescued alien. She was a warrior, someone who had seen far more than he could imagine. And for all the strength she showed, there was a vulnerability beneath her guarded expression. Finally, Mark broke the silence. "You're safe here. No one will hurt you." Kira didn't respond right away, but her eyes flicked toward him for a moment. "Safe," she muttered, "until someone else comes to collect me, the highest bidder." Mark sighed, pushing his tools aside. "Not going to happen," he said firmly. "I promised you that you'd be safe. I don't know what your past was like, but here no one owns you. Not me, not anyone." She raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "You're naive if you think it's that simple." Mark met her gaze. "Maybe, but I don't think it's too much to expect. No one should be sold like that." Kira seemed to think about this for a moment. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly, but she didn't relax entirely. "I've never been treated like I'm worth more than a prize." Mark's heart clenched at the pain in her voice. He had to admit he didn't understand the depth of her struggles. She had been sold, fought in wars, and somehow kept going. But at what cost? "I'm not asking you to trust me right away, but you can stay here as long as you need. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not selling you to anyone." She gave him a sideways glance, her expression still guarded. "I don't need your pity." Mark smiled, but it was a gentle smile, not mocking. "It's not pity, Kira, it's just trying to do what's right." Kira finally allowed herself a small smile in return. "You're different from the others." Mark stood up and walked over to her. "I don't know about that, but I'm definitely different from the last person who owned you." She frowned slightly, but it wasn't out of hostility. It was more like a defense mechanism. "You don't know me." "I know enough," Mark said, leaning casually against the wall. "You're not just some trophy, you're a person. A damn strong one, too, I can see that." Kira's gaze softened just a fraction, though she quickly looked away. "I've had to be strong," she replied. "When you're not the prettiest or the most powerful in the room, you learn how to fight. It's the only way to survive." Mark didn't know how to respond to that. He didn't know what it was like to have to fight for survival every day, to have to make choices like she had. But there was one thing he was sure of. He didn't want her to feel like she had to do it alone anymore. "I don't know if I can change anything for you, Kira," Mark said, his voice quieter now. "But I can promise that you don't have to fight alone anymore. Not with me." She looked at him again, really looked at him this time, and for a brief moment Mark thought he saw something flicker in her eyes. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. Maybe it was trust. Maybe it was the possibility that, for the first time in a long while, someone cared about her beyond her usefulness. She stood up, stretching her stiff muscles, her wings shifting awkwardly as they adjusted to the space. "I don't need anyone's charity," she muttered, but there was no bite in her words now. "I'm not offering charity," Mark replied with a soft laugh. "I'm offering a chance at a different kind of life, one where you don't have to fight just to prove you're worth something." Kira paused, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied him. "And what do you get out of this, Mark? Why help me?" Mark shrugged, a smile tugging at his lips. "Honestly, I don't know. Maybe because it feels like the right thing to do. Maybe because you're not the monster everyone thinks you are." Kira's eyes widened just a little, the briefest flicker of surprise crossing her face before she quickly masked it. "I'm not a monster." "No," Mark said quietly, his voice sincere, "you're not. But I think the galaxy needs more people like you. People who fight not for themselves but for something bigger." Kira blinked as if his words were sinking in. She looked down at the floor, lost in thought for a moment, then looked back up at him. "You're too trusting," she said, but her tone was lighter now, less harsh. Mark smiled. "Maybe, but I don't think that's such a bad thing, not when it comes to someone like you." The room grew quiet, and for the first time since they'd met, there was no tension between them. No awkward silence, just an understanding. Mark took a step closer to her. "If you'll let me, I'll show you that there's more to life than just surviving. Maybe we can figure this out together." Kira stared at him for a long moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. "I think I'd like that," she said softly. The days after the auction felt different. The tension that had once surrounded Mark and Kira began to fade, replaced by something more comfortable. Though they still didn't know each other well, they were learning to adjust to their new, unexpected arrangement. Mark kept his distance, giving Kira the space she needed, but also being there when she wanted to talk, or not talk, as it often was. Mark's quarters, small by most standards but spacious enough for a human, had become their shared space. There were no chains, no captors, and no expectations of ownership. Kira had insisted that she didn't need a protector, but as the days went on, Mark couldn't ignore the quiet moments when she seemed to need him. It wasn't pity or charity, not in the way she had feared. It was something different, something he couldn't quite explain, but it was growing steadily between them. One morning, Kira was sitting by the small window, watching the stars streak by as they traveled through space. Mark entered quietly, hopping to start the day off without disturbing her too much. But when he saw her there, lost in thought, he couldn't help but approach. "What's on your mind?" he asked gently, sitting across from her. His voice was soft, as if he didn't want to interrupt the peace she seemed to have found in the stillness of the moment. Kira turned her head slightly, offering him a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Just thinking about home," she said. Her voice wasn't as rough as it had been at first, but there was still an edge to it, one that Mark couldn't ignore. "I never thought I'd have the chance to go back. Now I'm not even sure where home is anymore." Mark leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I can't imagine what it's like losing everything you knew," he said, his voice low. "But maybe home isn't just a place. Maybe it's people. And right now, you've got someone who's trying to make sure you don't feel lost." Kira's eyes softened, though she didn't reply right away. Instead, she turned her attention back to the stars, her fingers lightly brushing the edge of the window. For a moment, the room was quiet, save for the hum of the ship. "You're different from everyone I've met," Kira said finally, her words slow and deliberate. "You don't expect anything from me except that I stay alive. And maybe I want to live, not just survive." Mark smiled, his heart swelling at her words. "Living means different things to different people," he said. "But I think, in your case, living means not letting anyone take you down. You're a warrior, Kira, that's who you are." She looked back at him, her red eyes searching his face. "You think so?" Mark nodded without hesitation. "I know so." The way Kira looked at him in that moment, vulnerable yet strong, made Mark's heart beat faster. There was no pretending, no games, just the two of them standing on the edge of something neither of them understood fully yet, but something that felt real. "I've never let anyone in, not really," Kira admitted quietly, breaking the silence between them. "I've never had a reason to. I've always been the weapon, the tool, the fighter. No one ever cared about who I was under all of that." Mark felt his chest tighten at her words, knowing all too well how it felt to be invisible, to be reduced to what people thought you were, not who you truly were. "I care," he said simply. "I care about you, Kira. Not just the warrior, but the person you are." Kira looked at him for a long time, the weight of his words settling between them. And then, almost as if she couldn't stop herself, a small smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "Maybe I've been wrong about humans," she said softly. Mark chuckled, his eyes lighting up. "Hey, we're not all bad." Kira shook her head lightly, her smile growing. "You're certainly not like the rest." For a moment there was something undeniably soft between them. It wasn't just the words. It was the feeling, the warmth of being seen, understood, something neither of them had experienced in a long time. And in that moment, Mark knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to let her down. Not now, not ever. Later that day, as they ventured outside to explore the station's small marketplace, Mark and Kira found themselves caught up in a conversation that lasted for hours. They wandered through the stalls, laughing at the strange alien foods and exotic trinkets, Kira's humor surprising him with each passing moment. Her sharp wit and dry jokes made him laugh in a way he hadn't in a long time. As the day turned into evening, Mark realized how easy it had become to be with her. They were no longer just the human and the alien. They were two people who had found something real in the midst of the chaos. And in a world that constantly shifted beneath their feet, that was something worth holding on to. That evening, they found a quiet spot near the station's observation deck. The stars above them seemed closer than ever, the entire galaxy spread out like a canvas just waiting to be explored. Mark looked over at Kira, her eyes reflecting the light of distant suns, and something inside him stirred. "Hey, Kira," he said, his voice soft. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" She turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "I've been thinking about it since the moment I woke up in that cell." Mark smiled, leaning a little closer to her. "You know, I think about it too. Whatever happens, I just want you to know we'll figure it out, together." For a moment, Kira said nothing, just gazed at him with that same mix of curiosity and wariness she always had. But then, slowly, she nodded. "Together, huh? I think I could live with that." And with that, they sat in comfortable silence, the universe stretching out before them, ready for whatever came next. The following days blurred together as Mark and Kira spent more time exploring the station and getting to know each other. They were two people from completely different worlds, one human, one alien. But they both had one thing in common now: survival. And that survival meant learning to trust one another, even if neither of them was fully ready for that trust. Kira was a mystery to Mark. The more he spent time with her, the more he realized how much he didn't understand. She was a warrior, hardened by war, betrayal, and pain. Yet underneath the fierce exterior there was a softness, a vulnerability she didn't show often, but Mark saw it in the quiet moments. Those were the times when she seemed to shed her defenses and just exist. And in those moments she wasn't the soldier or the captive. She was just a woman. A woman who had been through so much, and yet here she was, still standing, still breathing. One evening, as the stars outside the station shimmered like diamonds, Mark found himself standing beside her, both of them gazing out into the vast expanse of space. The universe stretched before them, endless and full of possibilities. Mark couldn't help but wonder about Kira's past, what had brought her to this point and what had kept her going all this time. But instead of asking, he just stood there, watching her, letting the silence speak for itself. Kira was the first to break it. "You know, I never imagined I'd end up here," she said, her voice soft but full of thought. "Not like this. Not safe. Not. Not with someone who doesn't want anything from me. Mark glanced at her, his heart tightening a little. I don't want anything from you, Kira. I told you before, I'm not here to own you or control you. I'm just here. She turned to face him, her red eyes searching his face. You could have gone back to Earth. You could have left me behind. I couldn't, Mark said quietly. When I saw you on that stage, I knew I couldn't just walk away. I wasn't going to leave you there, not like that. Kira's gaze softened, her lips curving into a small smile. You're a strange human. Mark chuckled, the sound light. Yeah, I've been told that a lot. But the humor didn't last. The moment felt heavy, full of unspoken words and emotions. Mark found himself growing serious, his voice quieter now. I'm here because I believe in you, Kira. I believe you deserve more than what life's thrown at you, more than what anyone's told you about who you are. She didn't speak for a moment. Her eyes, always so intense, seemed to soften as she looked at him. You don't know anything about me. Not really. Mark took a step closer to her, his heart pounding. I know enough. You've been through a lot. You've fought, you've survived, and you're stronger than anyone I know. But I also see someone who deserves to be happy, not just survive, but actually live. Kira's breath hitched slightly at his words, and for a moment she looked as if she might say something. But then she just shook her head, turning her gaze back to the stars. You don't understand, she said, her voice low, almost regretful. I've lived for so long just fighting, just surviving. I've never allowed myself to think about happiness. It's a luxury I don't think I can afford. Mark reached out, gently touching her arm. She tensed at the contact but didn't pull away. What if you could? He asked softly. What if you didn't have to fight anymore? What if you could just be you? Kira turned her head to meet his gaze, her eyes searching his, her expression unreadable. She wanted to pull away, to retreat behind the walls she'd spent so long building. But something in his eyes, something in the sincerity of his words, made it hard to keep those walls up. You're asking me to trust you, she said quietly, to trust that I could have something more than just war and pain. Mark smiled softly, stepping closer until they were standing almost shoulder to shoulder. I'm asking you to trust that you don't have to carry the weight of the universe alone. You don't have to fight anymore, Kira. Not with me. She looked at him for a long moment, and in the stillness of the space station, surrounded by the vast emptiness of space, something shifted between them. She let out a slow breath and finally nodded, just the tiniest of movements. I don't know how to let go, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to do it all at once, Mark said, his voice steady. You can take it slow. We can take it slow. For a long moment, Kira didn't say anything. But then, to Mark's surprise, she turned slightly, her body inching closer to his. There was no grand gesture, no sudden rush of emotions. Just a small step forward, one that spoke volumes. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his, tentative at first, but then she gently grasped his hand, her touch surprisingly warm. And in that quiet moment, Mark felt something shift in him too. It was the beginning of something, something that didn't need to be rushed, something that didn't need to be perfect. It was just the start of a bond, one that had formed out of trust, shared pain, and the hope of a future that was better than what either of them had imagined. Kira looked up at him, her eyes softening. I think I'm starting to understand, she said, her voice more certain than it had ever been before. Mark smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. Yeah, me too. And as they stood there, hand in hand, the stars shining down on them, neither of them could deny the quiet strength that was growing between them, one small step at a time. The days after their conversation by the observation window felt like a turning point for both Mark and Kira. The awkwardness between them slowly faded, replaced by something more comfortable, something that had the faint spark of something new. Kira was beginning to trust him, just a little, and Mark was finding that the more time he spent with her, the more he cared. They continued their daily routine, working, eating, and exploring the space station. but it wasn't the same as before. There was an unspoken understanding between them now, a shared sense of purpose. Kira was no longer just the warrior woman who had been bought at an auction. She was Kira, someone Mark was getting to know in ways he hadn't expected. One afternoon, Mark found himself waiting in the small living area of their quarters, his thoughts wandering. He had been thinking about what Kira had said, the words she hadn't said, the vulnerability she had shown. It was clear she didn't trust easily, but he was starting to see cracks in the walls she'd built around herself. And that was both exciting and terrifying. He heard the soft click of the door opening and Kira stepped in, looking as confident as always. But there was something different today. Her posture was more relaxed, her expression less guarded. It was a small change, but Mark noticed it right away. "I've been thinking," Kira said, walking over to the small table where Mark had set his things. She sat down across from him, her eyes meeting his. "About what you said, the part about living, not just surviving." Mark smiled softly. "Yeah." She shrugged, her wings shifting slightly in the confined space. "It's not easy to just switch gears. I've spent so long fighting, trying to keep my head above water. I don't know how to live without that constant tension. But maybe I'm willing to try." Mark's heart skipped a beat. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for, Kira. It's all about what feels right to you." Kira nodded, her gaze flickering away for a moment, as if she were working through the weight of her words. "I don't know why I'm telling you this," she muttered. "I've never let anyone in like this, not even my own people." Mark leaned forward, his eyes warm. "Maybe because you're starting to trust that not everyone wants something from you. I'm not here to own you, Kira. I'm just here to help if you'll let me." She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. But then, just when Mark thought she might retreat into her shell again, she smiled. A small, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Maybe I'm starting to believe you," she said, her voice soft but sincere. Mark's chest tightened with a mix of emotions. He couldn't explain it, but the connection between them was growing, even though neither of them fully understood it yet. He was starting to feel something for her, something more than just camaraderie. And from the way she looked at him, he thought maybe she was starting to feel it too. The conversation fell into a comfortable silence. They didn't need to say anything more. There was no pressure, no expectation, just the quiet understanding that something had changed between them. A few days later, Mark and Kira found themselves on the station's observation deck, gazing out at the vastness of space. The stars stretched endlessly before them, a reminder of how small and insignificant they were in the grand scheme of things. But in that moment, it didn't feel small. It felt infinite. "I never really stopped to look at the stars," Kira said quietly, breaking the silence. "I was always too focused on the next fight, the next battle." Mark glanced at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Well, there's no battle right now, just us and the stars." She looked at him then, her red eyes reflecting the light of distant suns. "It's peaceful here, more peaceful than I ever thought I'd find." He nodded, his smile softening. "Yeah, it is. And you deserve this peace, Kira. You deserve to be happy to just live." Kira's gaze shifted, and for the first time in days, Mark saw a flicker of something different in her eyes. Hope, maybe. Or maybe it was the possibility of something he hadn't dared to hope for. She took a deep breath and turned to face him fully. "I think I've spent so much time running from my past that I forgot to think about my future," Kira said. "But maybe I can start thinking about it. Maybe there's room for me in it, and room for us." Mark's heart skipped a beat. Her words hit him harder than he expected. There it was again, the unspoken connection, the thing neither of them had been able to fully name. He reached out slowly, his fingers brushing hers. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment it felt like everything. "Yeah, I think there's definitely room for us," he said softly. Kira didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand, intertwining her fingers with his. The warmth of her touch sent a rush of comfort through him, and he couldn't help but smile, a feeling of contentment settling in his chest. "I don't know what this is or where it's going," Kira said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "But for the first time in a long time, I think I'm ready to find out." Mark's smile grew and he squeezed her hand. "We'll take it one step at a time, Kira, together." As they stood there, hand in hand, watching the stars above, Mark realized that whatever came next, whatever challenges the universe threw at them, they would face it together. And for the first time in a long time, he was ready for the unknown. The days blurred together as Mark and Kira continued their quiet journey through space. Their connection was growing, something unspoken yet undeniable. Mark found himself thinking about her at unexpected moments, when he woke up in the morning, when he saw the stars at night, or even when the quiet of the space station settled over him. There was something about Kira, about the way she stood tall even after everything she'd been through, that drew him in deeper than he ever expected. Kira, for her part, was slowly letting go of the walls she'd built around herself. With each passing day, she seemed to soften, her sharp edges fading just a little more. She still had her moments of quiet, introspective thought, but there were also moments of laughter, small but meaningful moments that made Mark's heart light. Today, they were sitting on the balcony of their quarters, overlooking the station's small garden. The stars sparkled overhead, and the distant hum of the station was the only sound between them. It was peaceful, and Mark had come to cherish these moments, where there was nothing but the two of them and the silence of space. Kira looked at him, her red eyes scanning his face. "I never really thought about how small everything is until I saw the stars like this," she said, her voice soft but thoughtful. "Back home, I was always focused on surviving, on fighting. But here," she paused, her gaze drifting out to the stars again, "it feels like everything is so much bigger." Mark smiled, looking out at the vast expanse of space with her. "Yeah, I get that. I think we all get so caught up in the struggle that we forget to look at the bigger picture." Kira leaned back against the railing, her arms crossed loosely over her chest. "You've got a strange way of making everything sound simpler than it is, but maybe that's what I need." Mark chuckled lightly. "Well, I don't have all the answers, Kira, but I know that if you keep fighting all the time, you'll never give yourself a chance to breathe. Sometimes you have to let go of the weight for a little while and just be." Kira glanced at him, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "You're one of the few humans I've met who doesn't complicate everything." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Is that a compliment?" She laughed, the sound filling the quiet space around them. It was light, genuine, and it made Mark feel like he had won a small victory. "I guess it is." Mark's heart swelled at the sound of her laugh. He wasn't used to hearing it so freely from her. It was clear that she was starting to trust him, starting to believe that things could be different. And deep down, Mark realized that he wanted to be the one who proved to her that life didn't have to be a battle. The conversation lulled for a moment as they both gazed out into the stars, the vastness of space stretching before them. Mark shifted slightly, his hand brushing against hers. It was a small gesture, but when Kira didn't pull away, Mark's chest tightened. His heart was beating faster now, and he wasn't sure if it was from the closeness or the feeling of something deeper between them. "You know," Kira began, breaking the silence, "I've spent so much time alone, I forgot what it felt like to have someone who actually cared." Mark looked at her, his expression serious. "You're not alone anymore, Kira. You've got me." She met his gaze, her eyes softening. "I don't know how to thank you for all of this, for not giving up on me." Mark's heart skipped a beat and he reached out to gently take her hand. "You don't have to thank me," he said quietly. "I'm not doing this because I want anything from you. I'm doing this because I believe in you." Her fingers tightened around his, and for a brief moment they just stood there, holding hands, the warmth of their touch grounding them in the moment. Kira didn't pull away, didn't resist. She stayed close, and Mark felt a wave of emotion wash over him, something he hadn't expected, something he wasn't ready for, but something he couldn't ignore. "I've never had someone believe in me before," Kira said, her voice soft and almost vulnerable. "I've always had to believe in myself because no one else would, but maybe I'm starting to believe that it's okay to trust someone else." Mark's throat tightened as he looked at her, his heart full. "You don't have to do everything alone, not anymore." Kira's eyes met his, and for a moment everything else faded. There were no worries, no uncertainties, just the two of them standing together in the quiet of space. She stepped closer, her breath mingling with his, and Mark's pulse quickened. There was no rushing, no desperation, just a slow, inevitable pull toward each other. Without a word, Kira reached up, her hand resting gently against his cheek. Mark closed his eyes, feeling the softness of her touch, the tenderness in the way she held him. And then, slowly, she leaned in, her lips brushing against his. It wasn't a fiery kiss, not one born of desperation or passion. It was gentle, hesitant, like two people finding their way through the unknown together. And yet, it was everything, everything Mark had been hopping for and more. When they pulled away, Kira didn't move far. She stayed close, her forehead resting gently against his. "I think I'm starting to understand what it means to live, Mark," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark smiled, his hand still holding hers. "And I'll be here every step of the way to help you figure it out." In that moment, Mark knew that whatever came next, whatever challenges they would face it together. The universe was vast, full of unknowns, but with Kira by his side, he felt ready for anything. The next few days passed in a haze of calm and new beginnings. Mark and Kira had found a rhythm, and though it wasn't perfect, it was theirs. There were still moments of quiet, awkwardness, and uncertainty, but there were also moments of laughter, laughter that felt lighter, freer, as though they were beginning to shed the weight of their pasts. Mark had always considered himself a bit of a loner. He'd never truly needed anyone. At least, that's what he'd told himself. But with Kira, everything was different. There was a connection between them now that he couldn't ignore, and he wasn't sure he ever wanted to. It was as if, in the vastness of space, they had found something, someone worth fighting for. One afternoon, they found themselves walking through the station's marketplace. The aisles were filled with strange foods, odd trinkets, and even more strange creatures from all over the galaxy. But despite all the chaos around them, Mark and Kira stuck close together, the sounds of the marketplace fading into the background. For the first time in a long time, Mark felt like he had found something worth holding on to. Kira laughed as she picked up a strange-looking fruit, eyeing it skeptically before showing it to him. "What do you think this is?" she asked, a teasing smile on her face. Mark glanced at the fruit and raised an eyebrow. "I think that's either a fruit or an alien weapon designed to burn your tongue off." Kira grinned and shrugged. "Guess we'll find out." She took a bite, and immediately her eyes widened as she made a face. "Yep, definitely a weapon. Never again." Mark laughed, shaking his head. "I knew it. That's why you shouldn't trust anything that looks like it's glowing. Lesson learned." They continued to wander the market, Kira joking about the oddities around them and Mark occasionally finding himself mesmerized by the way her eyes lit up when she smiled. There was something so human about her, despite everything she had been through. The warrior, the survivor, she was all those things, but she was also just a person who deserved more than the endless struggle she had known for so long. After a while, they stopped by a small, quiet cafe tucked away in the corner of the market. It wasn't fancy, just a small place where the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods filled the air. Mark ordered a coffee, and Kira picked out a pastry she had never seen before, trying it out with an almost childlike curiosity. "So do you ever miss your home?" Mark asked as they sat down at a small table by the window, watching the crowd of aliens pass by. Kira paused, her eyes distant for a moment. She didn't answer right away, and for a brief second, Mark wondered if the question had hit too close to home. But then she looked at him, her expression softening. "I do," she said quietly, her voice tinged with a kind of sadness. "I miss the sky, the way it looked, the colors, the peace, but I can't go back, not after everything. Mark leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. What if you didn't have to go back? He asked, his voice gentle. What if you could build something new, something better? I don't know what that would look like, but I want to help you find it. Kira looked at him for a long moment, her red eyes searching his face. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Instead, she just reached across the table and took his hand, her fingers curling around his in a quiet act of trust. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The world seemed to fade as they sat there, hand in a place that wasn't home for either of them, but felt like it might be. I think I'm starting to understand what you mean, Kira said softly, breaking the silence. I think, maybe I'm starting to believe that there is something more, something beyond just fighting. I don't know how to make that happen, but I want to try. I want to see what that could look like with you. Mark's chest tightened at her words, and he smiled, the kind of smile that didn't need to be said aloud. He didn't know exactly where their journey was taking them, but he knew one thing: he wasn't going anywhere. Not now, not ever. I'm glad you want to try, Mark said, his voice full of sincerity. We don't have to have all the answers. We can just take it one step at a time. Kira nodded, her gaze softening. One step at a time. They sat in comfortable silence, the warmth between them growing. The marketplace continued on around them, but it didn't matter. In that small cafe, with the gentle hum of the station outside, there was a sense of peace, a peace Mark hadn't realized he was missing until it was right in front of him. I think I've spent too long running from my past, Kira said after a while, her voice quieter now. But maybe I can stop running now. Maybe I can start living with you. Mark's heart swelled at her words, and he squeezed her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. You don't have to do it alone. I'm here, and I always will be. Kira smiled, her eyes lighting up with something Mark hadn't seen before, something that looked a lot like hope. Together then, she said softly. Mark nodded, his heart full. Together. As they finished their coffee and talked about nothing and everything, Mark realized that no matter what the universe threw at them, he was ready. He had Kira by his side now, and that was all that mattered.